The chandeliers sparkled like stars, each crystal catching the light and throwing it back in golden shards across the marble floor. I stood there, near the back of the banquet hall, adjusting the neckline of my dress for the third time, hoping no one could see how my hands trembled. My heels clicked against the floor as I tried to find a spot where I wouldn't be noticed. Just one safe corner, just one quiet moment. But quiet doesn't last long in my family. The gala was for veterans, a prestigious event hosted by the city to honor military service and leadership. My father, retired colonel, and my older brother, now a decorated lieutenant colonel, were standing confidently near the center of the room, sipping something expensive and nodding to every handshake like they were made of brass and marble. They always belonged in rooms like this. I didn't. I wasn't invited. Not really. My mother had forwarded the invite with a short message. If you want to come, wear something decent. Don't embarrass us. That was her way of saying I could show up, but only as an extra. So I did what I always did. I tried to be invisible, but invisibility is fragile, especially when someone wants to crack it open. And my brother, David, was always good at that. He spotted me from across the room. His lips curled into that same smirk he wore when we were children, and he'd catch me playing with his army figurines. I should have looked away. I should have walked out. But my feet stayed. I watched him walk over with two other men, both in uniform, both clearly enjoying whatever private joke he'd whispered to them moments before. Well, David said, lifting his glass like he was saluting a ghost. Didn't think you'd crawl out of your little artist hole for an event like this. His voice was loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. My neck flushed red. I forced a smile. Nice to see you too, David. Is it? He replied with a chuckle. I thought you'd be allergic to medals and discipline. The men with him laughed, not cruelly, but in that empty, echoing way that told me they'd already judged me and found me amusing, maybe even harmless. I stood there, holding my glass like a shield. My voice caught somewhere behind my tongue, and in that silence, I felt it again, that old ache, the one that used to visit me when I was 10 and left at home during Father's parades. That deep, slow-dragging ache of knowing you are not part of the pride. You're tolerated, not celebrated. But just as I was about to excuse myself and slip back into the background, a voice cut through the air, deep, calm, commanding. Lieutenant Colonel David, I believe you're speaking to your sister. The room stilled. Heads turned. My brother's smirk vanished. The speaker was General Horace Mallory, the guest of honor that night. His name was embroidered in gold on every program. His photo was printed on the large banner behind the podium, and he was walking toward me. He looked like a storybook general, tall, silver-haired, posture like a statue. But his eyes were warm, direct, like they saw right through the medals and titles and into something deeper. I read her piece in The Painted Truth, the general said as he stopped beside me. You know, the one about grief and sacrifice. Beautiful, honest, far more courageous than anything I've read from a combat zone. I blinked. My breath caught. He turned to me and extended his hand. Miss Alden, I'm honored to meet you. I barely remembered how to move, but I placed my hand in his. His grip was firm, respectful. David coughed, shifting beside us. That article was about when Mom had cancer. Right, I nodded. And about how no one came to the hospital. Silence again, thick as fog. The general glanced at David. We honor those who serve their country, but we must not forget those who serve their families in silence. That, too, is a kind of war. I don't remember much of what happened in the next few minutes, only that he walked me toward the head table, that he introduced me to other guests, that my legs shook beneath me and my heart beat like a drum in a storm. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible, and my brother watched from the corner, quiet. It was the first time I'd ever seen him without something to say. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, still dressed in my gown, makeup smudged and hair tangled. The general's words echoed in my ears. That, too, is a kind of war. It stayed with me. Not because it was dramatic, but because it gave a name to everything I'd endured. I had fought a war, just not one with guns or boots. Mine was made of silences, shut doors, missed calls, and birthdays spent alone. I had fought for my place in a family that only seemed to cheer for uniforms, and I survived it. That moment with the general, it didn't erase all the hurt. It didn't rebuild lost years or change how my brother saw me, but it did something better. It made me see me. I wasn't small. I wasn't the leftover child. I wasn't invisible. I was someone whose quiet pain mattered, someone who stood in the middle of a grand hall, trembling but still standing. And someone had seen that. Someone had honored that. Sometimes, it takes a stranger's words to undo a lifetime of silence. Sometimes, one moment can balance the scale. That night, the balance shifted. Not entirely, but enough to make me walk taller. I wonder, have you ever had someone dismiss your quiet pain? Have you ever been made to feel like your story didn't belong in the room? Please share your story below. I'll be here, reading quietly. The next morning, I sat at my little kitchen table, still in my robe, coffee gone cold, the city buzzing just outside the window. My phone lit up with a message from David. Just 2 words. Nice moment. No apology, no acknowledgement, just that. I didn't respond, because if I'm being honest, I didn't know what to say. Not yet. The strange thing about being the quiet one in a family is how people come to believe that your silence means you have nothing to say. But the truth is, we carry entire novels inside entire years that were never seen, never asked about, never held. I remember being 14, sitting on the back steps with my sketchbook while the family gathered in the living room, watching one of David's training videos. Dad beamed. Mom brought out snacks. I don't think anyone noticed I wasn't there. That night, I drew a girl sitting inside a glass jar, tight, sealed. People outside tapping on the glass, saying things like, "She's just sensitive," or worse, "She always does this." I didn't show it to anyone. No one asked. At 19, when I won second place in a national painting competition, I emailed the news to the family group chat. David replied with a thumbs up. My mother asked why I hadn't picked a more practical major. My father never replied. That was the year I stopped trying to be impressive. But something changed after the gala. Not in the family. No, not yet. But in me. It started with how I walked into the studio. I used to tiptoe in, as if I didn't want to disturb the room. But now, I held my brush differently, straighter, like my hand had something to say and no one was going to interrupt it. And for the first time, I painted the hospital years. I painted my mother in her robe, sitting by the window of the oncology ward, head wrapped, eyes closed. I painted the nurse with the yellow clip in her hair, the one who used to sneak me tea when I stayed overnight. I painted the silence of the corridor after visiting hours, how it echoed louder than any siren. And then I painted myself. Not the real me, but the me I had become. One painting showed a woman standing in the rain, holding up a house on her back. The roof was cracked. The windows were shattered. But she was standing. Another showed a dinner table. One seat was covered in chains. The others were filled with shadows. Laughing. These weren't paintings I thought would sell. These were confessions. I called the series The Ones Who Stay, and I submitted it to the Veterans Healing Arts exhibition quietly, without telling anyone. I didn't think they'd even accept it. After all, I wasn't a veteran, just the daughter and sister of some, but they did more than accept it. They called 2 weeks later to say the general himself had recommended the submission. The opening night of the exhibit was smaller than the gala, less glamorous, more real. You could feel the stories in the room: paintings by amputees, poetry by widows, sculptures made from scrap metal found in bombed villages. I stood beside my pieces, heart pounding, as strangers walked by, lingered, and sometimes cried. One woman approached me, middle-aged, hair pulled back in a tight bun, with watery eyes and trembling lips. I sat by my husband's bed for 6 months while he fought his last battle. She whispered, no one ever painted what that felt like. Until now. We hugged without a word. I didn't realize David had come in until I turned and saw him standing at the far end of the gallery. Alone, hands in his pockets, looking at the painting of the chained dinner seat. He stayed there for a long time. When he walked over to me, he didn't look smug or sarcastic. He looked tired, maybe even small. You remember that night at the hospital? He said, eyes flicking to the canvas. I nodded. You mean the night Mom almost died and you didn't show up? He winced. I was in training. I didn't say anything. He added, but I could have come. I just didn't want to see her like that. I let that hang in the air. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because it was the first time he ever admitted it. He looked at the floor. I didn't think you noticed. I always noticed, I said. He nodded slowly. I see that now. Then he pointed to the rain painting, the woman holding the house on her back. That one's you, isn't it? I bit back tears. Yeah. He gave a short, breathy laugh. I always thought you were weak. All that emotion, the crying, the painting. But he trailed off, then cleared his throat. You were the one holding things together. I was just running. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from him. That night, we didn't fix everything. We didn't hug or cry or say we loved each other. But for the first time in years, we walked out of a room together, side by side. Not because we agreed, but because we finally saw each other. In the months that followed, I got offers for more exhibitions, some local, some far away. People began asking me to speak about The Ones Who Stay, about what it means to carry emotional weight in a family that only sees physical valor. But I always begin those talks with the same question: how many of you have felt invisible in your own home? And nearly every time, a room full of people raise their hands. That's when I know I'm not alone. There are many kinds of courage. Some wear medals, some wear paint. Some don't wear anything at all, but they still show up, day after day, and hold everything together. Have you ever been the one holding up the house? The one who stayed, while others left or looked away? If so, I see you. Please share your story below. I'll be here, as always, listening. There's a moment in life when you realize the room you grew up in, your childhood room, is no longer yours. For me, that moment came a few weeks after the exhibition, when my father called. Not texted, not emailed. Called. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. His name looked foreign sitting there. I hadn't heard his voice in over a year, maybe more. When I finally picked up, his voice was gruff, straight to the point. Your mother wants you to come over for dinner. Sunday, 7. Not a request, not an apology, a summons. Still, something in me whispered, go. The house hadn't changed. Same porch swing, same cracked stone path, Same front door that groaned like an old man when you opened it. Inside, the smell of baked chicken and rosemary greeted me. My mother was in the kitchen, fussing over the table, and she gave me a quick, distracted hug like we'd just seen each other yesterday. My father sat in his armchair, the television humming with the news on mute. David was already there too, seated stiffly at the table, hands folded like a boy waiting to be scolded. No one mentioned the exhibit. No one mentioned the gala. Instead, we talked about traffic, about the neighbors, about David's new posting, and then casually, as she poured the gravy, my mother said, "We've been thinking of turning your room into a craft space. You don't mind, do you?" My fork paused midair. That room, with the chipped windowsill and the little moons I'd painted on the ceiling when I was 15, that was the last part of me still anchored in that house. And now they wanted to repaint it in beige and fill it with yarn. No, I said, clearing my throat. Of course not. But something inside me cracked, not because I wanted the room, but because it proved something I'd always feared. I had already been moved out of their lives. They were just now making it official. That night, after dinner, I walked quietly down the hallway and pushed open the door. My room, still as I left it, sketches still taped to the wall, a mug of broken pencils still on the desk. I ran my fingers over the old bookshelf. On the second shelf was a copy of The Little Prince, gifted to me by my grandmother. I flipped through it absently, the pages worn soft by time. Inside the front cover, I had scribbled a note when I was 12. "Someday, I'll live in a house where no one forgets me." I don't even remember writing it, but there it was. A note from a younger me who had already begun to feel removed. When I walked back to the living room, my father looked up from his chair. "You all right?" he asked. I nodded, but something in me decided to try. So I asked him, "Did you ever read my article?" He frowned. "Which one?" "The one about Mom. The one the general mentioned at the gala." A pause. He shifted in his seat. I skimmed it. That hurt more than I expected. David, from across the room, looked down at his hands. "She stayed every night," he said quietly. My father raised an eyebrow. "What? During Mom's treatments?" "She was there. Every night." There was a silence then. Not hostile, not warm. Just silence. My mother spoke up, drying her hands on a towel. "I didn't know that." I nodded. "You didn't ask." I didn't say it to be cruel. I said it because I wanted them to see, to really see what I had carried while they saluted and marched and posed for holiday photos in dress uniforms. But they didn't respond. The words just hung there. So I left early. On the way home, I passed a bookstore. The lights were still on. Something in the window caught my eye, a new release called The Family We Choose. I stepped inside and bought it without even flipping it open. That title said enough. The next morning, I went to a cafe I used to avoid. It was always full of people mothers with kids, old men playing chess, couples sharing whispers across coffee cups. But I didn't want to hide anymore. I ordered tea, found a window seat, and pulled out my sketch pad. For 2 hours, I just drew people. A woman laughing over a croissant. A young boy holding his grandfather's hand. A man reading a book with his dog curled at his feet. There was something healing in watching strangers care for each other. No medals, no rules, just small kindnesses that asked for nothing in return. That afternoon, I received an email from the Veterans Association. They wanted to feature my work in a documentary series, Real Stories of Quiet Strength. I read the email twice, and then I cried. Not because of pride, but because the world I thought I'd always be on the outside of had opened a door. Not because of who my family was, but because of who I chose to become. A week later, David sent me a photo. It was of the old bedroom, my room. The walls had been repainted white, but on the far wall, above the desk, he'd framed one of my sketches. Beneath it, a note in his handwriting. "The ones who stay don't let us forget." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Some things, once seen, don't need to be said again. Families are complicated. They love you in crooked ways. They forget you sometimes. They build walls not out of cruelty, but out of their own unspoken wounds. But we're allowed to build something different. We're allowed to speak our truths, even if our voices tremble. And sometimes, if we're very brave, we're allowed to stop chasing their approval and start living our own story. It was a Tuesday evening when I received the invitation. It came in a cream envelope, thick and elegant, addressed by hand. Inside, it read, "You are cordially invited to a private dinner with General Horace Mallory and fellow guests to honor the unseen sacrifices made behind every service member. Please bring nothing but your story." I stared at those last 5 words for a long time. Please bring nothing but your story. Not credentials, not medals, not apologies. Just my story. The dinner was held in a quiet garden behind a museum, the kind of place where the air smells like lavender and chairs don't match on purpose. There were only 10 of us around the table, a war widow with soft, steady eyes, a man who'd grown up fatherless while his dad served 3 tours, a retired medic who now painted wildflowers, and me, the one who had never worn a uniform, but knew the echo of duty all too well. The general sat at the head of the table, dressed not in his formal uniform, but in a soft gray cardigan and slacks. He looked, for the first time, like someone's grandfather instead of someone's commander. He began the evening with a story of his own, about a letter he once received during deployment from his teenage daughter, a letter he never answered until she was grown and gone. She sent it to the wrong address, he said, smiling faintly, and by the time it reached me, I didn't know how to write back. Then he turned to me. "And now," he said gently, "I believe Miss Alden has something to share with us." I froze. Everyone turned to me not with pressure, but with something far harder to bear: kindness. That open, waiting silence that invites you to fill it with your truth. I looked down at my folded hands. The napkin in my lap was trembling. No, not the napkin. Me. And then I began. "I grew up in a house where every victory wore a uniform," I said quietly, "where bravery was measured by battles and ranks, and where anything quiet, soft was mistaken for weakness." I looked around. No one flinched. No one judged. I kept going. I was the daughter who stayed when my mother got sick, the one who held her hair while she vomited, the one who read her bedtime poems when the pain was too much. I was invisible then, and for a long time after. I paused, but I found something in that invisibility. I found that pain makes things clearer, that silence teaches you to listen deeper, and that sometimes the person who stays in the shadows is the one holding up the light. By the time I finished, my voice was hoarse and my eyes were wet. No one clapped. That would have felt wrong. Instead, the war widow leaned over and gently touched my hand. "You were a soldier too," she whispered. That dinner changed something inside me, not like a loud thunderclap, more like a steady drip of water on stone, reshaping me from the inside out. I began to say yes to things I used to hide from. I was invited to speak at a university class about art and emotional resilience. I said yes. A small publisher asked to print The Ones Who Stay as a printed collection. I said yes. A woman from the documentary team asked if I'd paint her daughter, who had died waiting for a father who never came back. I said yes, with tears. And I began to write letters to people I'd never thanked. One of those letters went to the nurse with the yellow clip. Her name was Carla. I found her through the hospital's volunteer network. My letter was short. You gave me tea when no one remembered I hadn't eaten. You smiled at my mother when her own family stayed home. You didn't wear a uniform, but you served. Thank you for seeing me. She replied within days. I never forgot you. I still remember your red sketchbook. You used to draw with your knees pulled up to your chest. You looked so scared. I'm glad you're still drawing. The more I spoke, the more people told me their own stories. At grocery stores, at bus stops, even online. A woman messaged me from Georgia. My son's in the army. He doesn't call, but I pack a box every month with his favorite snacks and a letter. I don't know if he reads them, but I send them anyway. Another wrote I cared for my sister's children while she went through deployment. No one ever said thank you. I didn't need it, but it would have helped. I started calling these people the quiet warriors. They didn't sign up for medals. They didn't march in parades, but they endured. They supported. They carried. And they belonged to something too. My family still isn't perfect. David tries, in his way. He sends links to articles he thinks I'll like. Once, he sent me a video of a soldier playing piano at a base. Reminded me of your kind of art. He said, my mother is softer now, less sharp. She'll occasionally call just to say she saw one of my paintings online. Sometimes she even asks, how are you, and actually waits for the answer. My father remains a quiet man. But one day, I found a copy of The Painted Truth on his bookshelf, marked with sticky notes. That was enough. But the real shift, the lasting one, was within me, because I finally understood my story never needed permission to matter. I didn't need applause to be valid, and silence, while heavy, is not the same as absence. I began writing a new series. This one, I called Rooms Without Walls. Each painting showed a person inside a room, but the walls were broken open. The ceilings were gone. Some rooms floated in the sky. Some were underwater. Some spilled into gardens. Because I realized something. We don't have to live inside the rooms others assign us. We can make our own. Have you ever felt like your story didn't belong in the main room? Have you ever lived in the shadow of someone else's spotlight? If so, I hope you know this. Your room matters, even if it doesn't have medals, even if it's quiet, even if no one thanks you yet. Because sometimes the strongest people are the ones who stay. 2 years after the gala, the city council approved a proposal for a new public memorial, not just a statue, but a whole installation dedicated to invisible service. That's what they called it. Invisible service. It was General Mallory's idea. The original plan had been another bronze soldier, boots planted firm, flag flying behind him. But the general said no. He said, we have enough statues of people saluting. Let's honor the ones who were never saluted. And to my absolute disbelief, he asked me to design it. I remember the meeting clearly. It was held in a pale, echoing room with long windows and a dozen officials wearing suits that looked too stiff for real conversation. When they introduced me as the lead artist, some looked surprised. One even asked, do you have experience with monuments? I smiled gently. No, I said. But I have experience being forgotten. The room went quiet. And then the general nodded. That's exactly the point. The design was simple, but it took months to perfect. It would be a walkway, a garden path, shaped in a soft spiral, bordered by tall iron panels, and on every panel, there would be names not of soldiers, but of caregivers, wives, husbands, parents, children, siblings, neighbors, friends, people who had stayed. We called it the Gallery of Names. And instead of plaques or marble busts, each name was accompanied by a sentence, a memory submitted by someone who knew them. One read, "She folded his uniforms every night, even when he didn't come home." Another, "He taught the kids to ride bikes while their mom fought overseas." Another, "No medals, just casseroles." For everyone on our block. By the time the panels were printed, we had over 2,000 submissions. We ran out of space, had to curve the path a little wider to fit more panels. I asked the committee to keep adding every year. They agreed. And just before the grand opening, I added one last name myself, Teresa Alden. My mother. The sentence below it read, "She forgot to say thank you, but I remember how she smiled when I brought her tea." Opening day came with no fanfare. That was the point. There were no marching bands, no fireworks, no speeches shouted into microphones. Just an invitation: come walk the path. Leave a flower. Say a name out loud. I stood by the entrance, quietly watching the visitors arrive. Some came alone. Some held hands. Some pushed strollers. Others rolled wheelchairs. But every single person walked slowly, gently, as if the air itself required respect. And then I saw them. My father, my mother, David. They stood together, just beyond the first panel, reading. No one said anything for a long time. Then David stepped forward, touched one of the iron panels, and closed his eyes. That night, after everyone had gone, I walked the path one last time. It had rained a little in the afternoon, so the stone walkway was damp, glistening under the low garden lights. The names looked like they were shining. As I walked, I whispered a few of them out loud. Patricia, Donovan, Maya, Elias, Ruth. The wind rustled gently through the garden trees. I imagined them listening, and when I reached the last panel, where my mother's name was etched, I paused. Not because I was sad, but because I felt something I'd never really let myself feel before peace. The general passed away 6 months later. His wife sent me a letter handwritten on thick stationery. He kept a photo of the gallery on his desk, said it was the most important thing he'd ever done. Thank you for seeing what he never had the words to say. I cried when I read that. Not the loud, heaving kind, just quiet tears, like a storm finally letting go. The gallery became more than just a memorial. Schools started bringing students there. Teachers used the stories to teach empathy. Nurses brought patients there for gentle walks. Some people began writing letters to the names on the panels, leaving them tucked in the cracks. I read one that said, "You never met me, but your story saved me." Others brought sketchbooks, sitting cross-legged in the grass to draw whatever came to mind. I joined them sometimes, and I started a new series called Letters to the Unknown. In one painting, a girl sits on a swing, holding a crumpled letter with no address. In another, a man builds a house from folded notes. David visits the gallery once a month now. Sometimes he brings his daughter, my niece. Her name is Elise. She's 6. Loves frogs and eats her apples whole, core and all. She calls me Auntie T. The last time she visited, she ran up to a panel and pointed. "This one's Grandma." "Right," I nodded. "And you made all of these?" "Not all." I smiled. "Just the place for them." She looked around with wide eyes. "You're the boss of remembering." I laughed, but something in that phrase stuck with me. The boss of remembering. Maybe that's what I had become. It's strange how things work out. I never got the kind of recognition my brother received. But in the end, my work reached places his medals never could. Not because I was louder, but because I stopped apologizing for being quiet, because I stopped asking to be invited to their table, and built a table of my own. And now, whenever someone asks what I do, I say I tell the stories no one asks about. That usually makes them pause, and then lean in. And that's where healing begins. So I ask you, what stories are you carrying quietly? Who in your life deserves to have their name remembered? What room do you wish someone had built for you? You can share it here. If you want. Someone will be listening. Maybe that someone is me. Maybe that someone is the version of you that never stopped hoping. Either way, your story matters.